My name is Edgar Mannheimer, and this is Kalam, a podcast about the Middle East.
In terms of is he genuinely away from global jihadism and ISIS? I think yes. That's what I think. I mean, I've written about it. I think I've seen it with my own eyes how he managed to. However, there are other questions, right? So I think you don't have to be jihadi to be bad. You can be, like Bashar al-Assad is bad, but he was not jihadi, right?
The voice you just heard belongs to Orwa Ajjoub, a PhD candidate at Malmö University, where he researches Sunni jihadi rhetoric. Orwa was kind enough to share his insights about the jihadist networks that have been at play in Syria since the deadly civil war broke out in 2011. Orwa Ajjoub is himself from Syria and was forced to leave to avoid military conscription in 2014. He hasn't been able to return since then because of the things that he's been writing, and obviously because the Assad regime did not tolerate free thinking. In today's episode, Orwa and I speak about the organization HTS, Tahrir al-Sham, and its leader, 42-year-old Ahmed al-Sharaa, better known by his nom de guerre, Abu Mohammed al-Julani. As always, if you'd like to support Kalam Podcast and gain access to lots of great bonus content, head over to patreon.com/Kalam Podcast and sign up for just $3 a month. This helps us continue to bring you independent journalism about the history, culture, and politics of the Middle East. And please subscribe to Kalam Podcast and give us a rating in whatever podcast application you're listening to right now. It helps other people find out about us. And if you'd like to watch many of our episodes, you can do so at our YouTube channel. Just go to youtube.com and search for Kalam Podcast. Now, without further ado, here's Orwa Ajjoub. Thank you so much, Orwa Ajjoub, for joining Kalam Podcast for this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Edgar, for having me.
So could you briefly introduce yourself and sort of like your personal background and then what you've been doing in terms of academia, studying jihadist groups like HTS?
Yeah, I'm from Syria. I moved to Sweden in 2014. And I studied here. I did my master's, and then I started my PhD last year. I left Syria because I had to go to military service. But then also, when I started writing, it became a little bit difficult for me to think about going. There were different security factors that prevented me from going back. So that's my personal story. My research, I started I wrote my master thesis about HTS, and it was called Jabhat Nusra at the time. So about Jabhat Nusra, the Islamic State in Iraq relationships, the split that took place in 2013. We're going to talk about it now. And now I'm writing my PhD also about intra-jihadi violence between Jabhat Nusra and ISIS and HTS and also Al-Qaeda in Syria. So I'm following the group basically from its inception until today, or 2020, let's say. But I also work as a research analyst, which was my job for 3 or 4 years, working on Syria in particular and security in the region. So that's in a nutshell what I do.
I guess my first question is who are HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham? But in order to tell that story, I guess you have to tell the story of what they came from, Jabhat al-Nusra. And to tell that story, maybe you need to jump a bit further back. So I'll let you, the expert, decide what the starting point is, but try to give us an idea of who they are.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the Syrian revolution was the starting point, in a sense that there was security chaos, political instability, and that led to the emergence of many non-state actors, jihadis and Islamists. And I think it's important to highlight here, I know this is sometimes people say this is just academic polemic and debate, but I think it's important to highlight the differences between these groups. And I will do that later, but I'm just trying to say is that there were wide array of groups with different political and religious leanings. And among them was Jabhat al-Nusra. Jabhat al-Nusra started operating in Syria in 2011, late 2011. However, the formal establishment was in January 2012. So the story began by that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of the Islamic State in Iraq, ISI, sent Abu Muhammad al-Julani, the current leader of HTS, with a few men, handful of men, to Syria to establish the Islamic State in Iraq wing in Syria. So that was like the deal. And the deal also entailed that the relationship between Jabhat al-Nusra, the new branch, and the Islamic State in Iraq would be kept secret for various reasons. One of them is the bad reputation that the Islamic State in Iraq got during its war, the sectarian tone. The second is the differences in context. The third is that they want to look to the Syrian people as Syrian because like there are different it's a different context, right? Like in Iraq there was occupation, in Syria there was a revolution. And that was like what also Mohammed Julani talked about later when he talked about how he proposed. So basically, he proposed a plan for his leader, and his leader accepted the plan and sent him to establish Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria. And the group, from its inception, managed to win the heart and mind of civilians for various reasons. One of them, it avoided imposing its diktat on the population in areas under its operation. So when you see Jabhat Nusra, you know that they are not there to rule. At least this is what they have been trying, they tried to show, right? The second one is that they introduced the suicidal bombers to the Syrian conflict. So in a sense, if you think about it, the suicidal bombing and something called also the Enghimasi tactics, which is basically the Enghimasi is a fighter who's well trained, who would go behind the enemy's line and then kill high target or like as much as possible of high targets and then detonate himself. So there's a difference between two. But however, it was Jabhat Nusra which introduced these tactics to the Syrian conflict, and that was like very effective. But of course, as we just said, al-Baghdadi sent al-Julani with handful of men, and these handful of men went to Syria and created Jabhat al-Nusra. So Jabhat al-Nusra received a lot of foreign fighters from the original branch, but it also received fighters from Syria because it was called Jabhat al-Nusra for the support of people of al-Sham. Like it was meant to be Syrian in a way or another, although it was not purely Syrian. They managed to, as I said, they also took part with, they cooperated with Islamist factions and nationalist factions on the ground because very few people knew about the affiliation to the Islamic State in Iraq. That's one. Second, what mattered at the time, it was like they want to topple Assad regime. And people were, kind of ready to overlook this affiliation if it was known. Anyhow, by April 2013, disagreements between al-Baghdadi, the leader of the Islamic State in Iraq, and al-Julani became uncontainable for various reasons. One of them, Jabhat Nusra popularity, as I just said. So al-Baghdadi felt that he needed to take credit, maybe. The other one is that al-Baghdadi asked al-Julani to carry out some tasks. Al-Julani refused. One of them, for example, to carry out explosion or like send suicidal bomber to the Syrian National Council, which is the opposition council in Istanbul. And the other is to target areas with civilians. So Julani was always refusing his boss directed. That's in mind. April 2013, the leader of the Islamic State in Iraq, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, unilaterally issued a statement announcing that Jabhat al-Nusra was only a branch of the Islamic State in Iraq and al-Julani was his soldier. That was like a really shock within the jihadi environment in Syria, what to do. Many jihadis got really lost, like, okay, shall we follow al-Baghdadi or like, what shall we do? Within 24 hours or like 2 days maximum, al-Julani released a statement while acknowledging the ties with the Islamic State in Iraq. He, according to him, renewed his oath of allegiance to the head of Al-Qaeda Central, Ayman al-Zawahiri at the time. So in a way, he wanted to get rid of al-Baghdadi's hand on him, but at the same time, that was the only way, right? And it's important to note here that both the groups were on paper affiliated with Al-Qaeda in theory, right? So Al-Qaeda was the mother organization of the Islamic State in Iraq, but that was in theory. But in practice, the Iraqi branch was very much independent. And the whole creation of Jabhat al-Nusra, I think, was Islamic State in Iraq creation. But anyhow, when al-Baghdadi announced that Jabhat al-Nusra is part of his group and al-Julani is his soldier, he also announced the abolishment, or like he canceled the names of Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State in Iraq, and he created something new, which is ISIS, which is the Islamic State in Iraq and Sham, or ISIL, the Islamic State in Sham and Levant. That was a critical moment within the jihadi environment where many fighters did not know what to do. Like al-Julani, for example, said that he acknowledged the ties with al-Baghdadi, but also he wants to be with al-Qaeda. That was like 6 months of discursive contestation between leaders and ideologues within the Sunni jihadi movement. January 2014, war started between Jabhat al-Nusra, supported by other factions on the ground, against IS. That was like, since then, ISIS and HTS today have been sworn enemies. Like that was like the game for them. So this is like just to debunk his links to ISIS. Since then, we have proof that he has been targeting ISIS. However, by 2015, there was the biggest military umbrella of Islamist group created by a Saudi figure, or like he was the godfather of it. His name is Abdullah al-Haisni, which brought about Jabhat al-Nusra and other local factions to fight the regime in Idlib, to take Idlib city from the regime. That was like really big scene. Everyone was hopeful that the regime will collapse, and they took Idlib from the regime. However, after this win, local groups supported by Qatar, Turkey, UAE, they could not really maintain ties with Jabhat al-Nusra because it's al-Qaeda affiliate. And their backers were threatening them to cut funds if they continue with this cooperation, right? So Jabhat al-Nusra was pressured in that sense. First of all, the international coalition to fight ISIS had already started, and they realized that, after ISIS, it will be their turn. So for them to survive, they need to embed themselves within the opposition. The Islamist opposition, it's fine. They don't have to go, just the Islamist opposition that is funded by Turkey and Qatar. And this is where it started discussion within Jabhat al-Nusra inner circle, was like, shall we disown al-Qaeda, or like, shall we stay with al-Qaeda? And let's not forget, when al-Julani decided to join al-Qaeda, when he decided to break from ISIS, al-Qaeda, although said that, al-Julani was wrong in announcing the ties with ISIS, whatever, like all this media shit, but they still send human, like hardliners from al-Qaeda, to supervise the new branch of them in Syria. So al-Julani was surrounded by really veteran jihadis, those who fought with Bin Laden. They've been fighting for 30 years, like different jihadi fronts. So they were sent to oversee the process. That realization that having al-Qaeda's name or label was very costly for al-Julani. The US international coalition intensified its strike on the group. They tried to kill what they called Khorasan group, which is basically this men I told you about. They were called Khorasan group in the media. So US intensified its strike. The local factions did not want to merge. And then the question becomes, okay, what shall we do? And this is where the discussion came, and al-Julani decided to break up from al-Qaeda and say he's a local group, right? At the beginning, I think it was more of test the water break. So he appeared on TV for the first time. We haven't seen his face before, similar to other jihadi leaders. We've seen his face for the first time. So he's right. It was one of al-Qaeda veteran, just to tell everyone that, this split from al-Qaeda, it was accepted by al-Qaeda in a way or another. And then to his right is now second man, Abdurrahim Hattoun, who is like the top highest religious. He's the mufti of the group, the Sharia of the group, you could say. So he showed and he said that we're not part of al-Qaeda, we're not part of any group. That was like, it took a year until al-Qaeda could respond. So basically, he decided to break up al-Qaeda. He convinced al-Qaeda deputy in Syria that this break is conditioned on the approval of al-Zawahiri. So basically, they said, okay, we're gonna break. If al-Zawahiri decide that this is not okay, then we're gonna just go back to al-Qaeda. That was the deal at the time. However, within a year, less than a year, al-Zawahiri went on and said, this is not okay. You cannot break ties with al-Qaeda. It's not a joke. It's a serious bay'ah, oath of allegiance. a group of people, a group of hardliners defected from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and they started something called Hurras al-Din, which was Al-Qaeda group in Syria. So HTS, the shift was Jabhat al-Nusra and then Jabhat Fath al-Sham, which is HTS-led constellation of groups, and then Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And this is where those who are dissatisfied with the Julani pragmatism, with his shift from ISIS and Al-Qaeda and breaking the oath of allegiance twice, they decided to establish this group. This group was Al-Qaeda in Syria. And since then, this group tried to challenge al-Julani's dominance over Idlib. And in 2020, al-Julani just put an end to the group. First, it was a containment policy. Then it was cracking down on their bases. And then, just force them outside the city. So what we have now, like the scene right now, is that HTS was ISIS and then Al-Qaeda, but then in 2017, with high sense of pragmatism of its leadership, they decided that to stay in power, they need to solidify their rule, but also they need to send messages to the international community and the US in particular that they can be a trusted partner in the war against terror. So that was like the game until now, like since 2017, 2018, when they broke from Al-Qaeda and started cracking down on Al-Qaeda, up until today, the group went through massive transformation in terms of, like, as I said, ideologically, organizationally, they are not Al-Qaeda, right? Ideologically, they went through revision, right? So they started to see, okay, we have this Salafi jihadi ideology, which is like transnational, right? So jihad for the sake of the ummah. They don't believe in nation state system because it's a positive law. They don't have a parliament. So if you see, they kind of like worked on some issues, but also they left some issues. So for example, they have a Shura Council, which is a parliament in an Islamic flavor, right? For example, they started working with other countries, with Turkey. They respected the agreement of Turkish, Iranian, and Russian agreements over Syria. They respected, they protected the agreements. They fought Al-Qaeda because Al-Qaeda wanted to challenge the international agreements. So they have high sense of pragmatism, and they've changed a lot. Relationship, for example, with minorities, that's a big question everyone is asking. 2014, a group of hardliners within Jabhat al-Nusra committed a massacre against the Rus community in Idlib. 2020, 2021, Mohammed al-Julani coming out and saying, like, we don't accept that, you are part of the society, and you know what we did to those people who did this massacre to you. So, the group has changed massively when it comes how it sees itself, how it sees the society, how it think that you need to have high sense of pragmatism to rule, unlike the previous group that was called Jabhat al-Nusra, where it was a militia, it was literally a jihadi groups that was trying to find itself a spot within the jihadi environment.
I mean, you mentioned the word pragmatism a lot. Do you think that the ideological shift is purely pragmatic, or do you think that Jolani and many people who decided to stay in HTS and not join any of the offshoots or not go back to ISIS or Al-Qaeda, that they genuinely believe in a more kind of pluralistic society or something like that? Or like, what is your take on the sort of genuine nature or not of their pragmatism?
I mean, Edgar, at the end of the day, no one can be certain about anything, right? Like you can't say anything that, oh, for certain, for sure, this is happening. However, there are like enough signs, enough indications, enough evidence which tell that the group is not Jabhat al-Nusra anymore, right? So when anti-HTS people want to trash the group, they say it's still Jabhat al-Nusra, the core of Jabhat al-Nusra. Like, I think Jabhat al-Nusra doesn't exist anymore as a group, right? Like, in terms of everything, like if you look, for example, about Idlib, for example, like if you look at Idlib today, right? 2020, October 2020, Al-Qaeda created Ras al-Din in Syria, created in Idlib. They were based in Idlib. They created a military room of operation, like a collection of groups, and it's called Fathbatu. And then another one called Harad al-Mu'minin. These two rooms of operations were meant to bring about unity by those who were dissatisfied with HTS pragmatism towards Turkish intervention, towards relationship with Turkey and Russia, towards different issues, right? So in 2016, 2017, 2018, HTS still held the belief that Turkey is a secular state. And secularism is like being infidel, like for Sunni jihadi groups, right? However, it was HTS that accompanied 12 Turkish point to like they accompanied the Turkish army to install 12 Turkish point military point in Idlib, right? That was 2017. So you see, the public discourse was still like Turkey is an infidel state, but they allowed Turkey to come in. Guess what? Because if Turkey doesn't come in, they are under the regime's threat. So either or. So they started with this, right? So after a while, they were like, some of their ideologues, for example, they were saying like, okay, if Turkey and the regime both are infidels, there are infidels who are worse than other infidels. That's like the theological reasoning, you know? So Turkey is still like the Turkish soldier is still is a Muslim, while the Alawite soldiers or the regime soldiers might not be, right? So you see the discussion how shifted. And then in 2020, when the regime attacked Idlib to take a huge part of it, it was Turkey intervened. Turkey intervened to stop the aggression. That was the first time when HTS publicly thanked Turkey. So the relationship with nation state and other state and the international system is a really important indication, because if you look at Sunni jihadi groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they don't believe in that. They don't believe in any sort of democratic process. They don't believe in the nation state system. For them, it's something that they don't accept, unlike HTS. But if you look at HTS discourse pre-2017, that was the discourse, that was the discussion. After 2017, they are different people. They are trying to, they are working with the international community. They've sent many messages. And then guess what? Who on earth would be like a jihadi who would kill Al-Qaeda leaders in Syria? Like, who is that jihadi who would, you know, it's crazy for them. It's literally crazy for them. And I'll give you this example because I personally don't think of Mohammed Julani as a Sunni jihadi in that sense. Um, I had this podcast once, and then I was with also with another speaker who was like researcher on Syria also and jihadi groups. And then one of the audience asked him, "But how did al-Julani, this young Julani, manage to kind of deceive all these jihadis like Al Qaeda, ISIS?" And then this guy said, the journalist said, because they are not used to have someone who's as pragmatic as al-Julani. So he cannot be one of them, you know? He's too pragmatic. So what I'm trying to say in terms of like what you see on the ground, definitely the group has, you know, left this global agenda of Sunni, of Salafi jihadism. For example, in Idlib, they have the law. It's a Sharia law, right? It's the source of legislation, and they are Salafis by default, right? And Salafis rely on the Hanbali school of thoughts, generally speaking. But the majority of Idlib is Shafi'in. They follow the Shafi'ah. So HTS now accepted in the Fatwa Council to have Shafi'i scholar in Idlib, right? I'll give you another example, how pragmatic they are. When COVID happened, they, there were a lot of recommendations to close mosques. HTS decided to close mosques because they can't afford people dying. They don't have enough capacity to deal with it. After 1 week, hardliners in Idlib, whether within the group or outside the group, went on crazy about it. They were denying this. They were like, no way, we're not going to the mosque. And al-Julani decided, okay, guess what? I'm not gonna fight this. Let them go to mosque. So he's like really pragmatic, trying to deal with every aspect of his society, his group. He also, for example, there was a group of people, a group of ideologues. I call them the Egyptian wing because all of them are from Egypt. They came after Morsi fell to Syria to join jihadi groups. Some of them joined HTS. He used them to fight other group when the group was like pro infighting and the group was Jabhat al-Nusra. And then when he shifted, he got rid of them because they were too extreme for him. Their public discourse was too extreme. So he always, like HTS always cite this. These people disagreed with the policy of the group. خالفوا تعاليم الجماعة وبالتالي they are out. تعليم الجماعة is very vague and, it's very pragmatic. So in terms of like, is he genuinely away from global jihadism and ISIS? I think yes. That's what I think. I mean, I've written about it. I think I've seen it with my own eyes, how he managed to. However, there are other questions related to, right? So I think like you don't have to be jihadi to be bad. You can be,
Exactly.
like Bashar al-Assad is bad, but he was not jihadi, right?
Because that I mean it perfectly brings me to my next question, because I mean, like, not being an international jihadi and like tolerating the presence of other groups and tolerating other schools of thought within the Islamic system, like and not just kind of like revenge killing Alawi communities and stuff like that. That's one thing. But then I wonder what would, I mean, and that's pragmatism in one sense, of course, but I wonder what you would think when he inevitably will be, facing a very different kind of opposition, maybe like from sort of like secular intellectuals in Damascus, or women's rights, or even like LGBTQ right, like anything like that, or just like tolerating people having a drink in Damascus. Like, what do you think when it comes to that? Or is that even an issue that people in Syria would even care about at this point?
I think there were a lot of at stake for different segments of the Syrian society. As you just said, Edgar, like, for example, my secular friends were so upset by the new prime minister giving a talk in somewhere, and then he had the revolutionary flag behind him and HTS flag. So there was like big uproar, and people were like, "Oh, this is we moved from al-Ba'ath party to come to HTS." Within a couple of hours, he showed up on TV without the flag, the same prime minister. So, like, this sign of like being able to adopt in that way, on the one hand, it's good because, he knows that there is a diverse composition of the Syrian society and he needs to adapt and adjust. But at the same time, he's hungry for power. He is willing to go to enormous lengths to keep himself in power. And that's scary, I think. And I think, like, it's always, I don't think it's right to say, think of Idlib and then apply this rule in Idlib into Damascus and see it's going to be the same. I think this is not fair, right? Different contexts, different sects, different type of religiosity, different socio-political context. Everything is different, right? But you can still think about it. You can still like, okay, if this is how it's in Idlib, this is how it's going to be in Syria, right? So up until the opposition started their operation for more than 1 year, there was weekly demonstration against Mohammed al-Julani in Idlib, calling on him to leave power. Weekly demonstrations and big demonstrations. So this is really paradox because in the one hand, it shows you like he knew how to contain demonstrations. But on the other, it shows you that the man was an authoritarian guy in Idlib. Like the demonstration went on for different issues, but among them is the release of the detained people. Some of them were released, and then they talked about the torture they experienced in his presence, and some of them died in his presence, right? So this is Muhammad Jolani. And then, now we just talked about how he managed to go from ISIS to Al-Qaeda, and in 2017 how he wiped out Turkish-backed forces in Idlib, and he took from them Bab al-Hawa crossing, which is the lifeline of Idlib today.
Yeah.
So the guy is very smart, is very pragmatic. He's ready to go above and beyond to take to stay in power in Idlib. When there was like, most of these people who are detained are his opponents, his political opponents, right? Most of them are Islamists, but I mean, not all of them are ISIS or Al Qaeda. People are not asking to release ISIS detainees at his presence because he has detained a lot of them. He was successful in that. Or Al Qaeda detainees. People are asking to release the civilian detainees who are his opponents. So this is when it comes to the political system itself. When you think about the governance, so the governance, it's so interesting because on the one hand, the Salvation government, given the circumstances it faces, I mean, Idlib lives on international donation, right, on aid. Given the small enclave it control, where it has only one border crossing, given the idea that it's surrounded by the Syrian regime and the Syrian National Army, so it has a lot of enemies around, right? It was doing an okay job, relatively speaking, if you compare interim government, which rules over a Syrian-backed national army, like close to Idlib in Afrin and in Al-Bab. So these areas are run by Turkey-supported groups. HTS was managed to provide relatively better security and better governance. And if you compare Idlib also, especially Idlib, the city, to other areas in the regime area, you find that HTS was better in some sense, in some parts. But the whole Idlib state, like how it was built, it is very undemocratic.
Yeah.
Like all of it, all the system is built on undemocratic basis. So in Idlib, there is the Salvation government, right? Which is a semi to a technocrat government. So these people are often not micromanaged by HTS, but they have some space of maneuver. So they are not really controlled. But none of the ministers who come to office are not blessed by HTS, right? And so here how it goes. We have the Shura Council, which is basically HTS affiliated men who are not affiliated with the group, but they are loyal to the group in a way, right? So the majority of them are close to al-Julani himself. The Shura Council decide the prime minister, nominate the prime minister. The prime minister nominate the ministries. So Shura Council, which controlled by al-Julani, but he's not in the front. It's a legislative body, it's a parliament, and it not only choose the prime minister, but also ministries should consult them in bigger matters. So it's not, it's not democratic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you think about it, are we going to see the same as we talked about Edgar? We cannot compare, but I'm just asking myself, are we going to see Idlib style? Like, are we going to have Shura Council in Syria, in all Syria? Or are we going to have a parliament? So yesterday evening, he suspended the parliament for 3 months and the constitution. So what does that mean? Are we going to have a new constitution, new parliament, or are we going to just have a new paradigm, like bringing the Shura Council? And the Shura Council is so problematic, Edgar, in the sense that the Shura Council doesn't have women. And the ministers of Idlib, also the Salvation government, there are no women, right? There's no minorities. And I think protecting minorities' right is completely different from representing minorities. So will we have minorities, or we are just going to see just like meaningless representation, which is the case, I think, probably. But again, how he's going to deal with these challenges? There are many really challenges that Mohammed Julain needs to deal with. What I know that he's very pragmatic. He is very smart. He knows that to rule over Syria is different from to rule over Idlib. He knows this very well. Um, Again, I don't know how this is gonna unfold. But also, Edgar, I think like even if HTS does not impose its diktat or like Idlib paradigm on people in Damascus and Homs and stuff, there is some pressure, social pressure to perform. I'll give you an example. So my friend in Damascus, he was like, I was walking on the street and then it was the adhan of Dhuhr, maybe like, people start praying. And then, some fighters just like put their mats and started praying on the street, like aside from the street. And he said, like, I saw civilians doing it. And I was wondering, should I do it to show them that I am part of this or should I wait? But civilians' pressure was big.
Yeah.
So HTS doesn't have to really like impose its diktat, but the atmosphere, the environment, create this kind of like a practice that gives you the sense of belonging to the ruling group,
Yeah.
right? This is one. The second thing is we don't know how they're going to deal with the Christian areas. Like, I mean, now we have Christmas. So far, again, there have been a lot of positive signs. A lot of positive signs, like the way they are dealing with the Christian communities, the way also how they dealt with other minorities. It's so far so good, and that makes me a little bit wait and ponder and say like, is this all like politics? Where is it gonna lead? Like where is like where what's the end point? Um, so yeah, and then back to women representation. As I said, he needs to adopt. I think LGBTQ question is not a matter of discussion now, and I bet many Syrians, especially like in the conservative part of the country, I think they are pretty much against it, and I don't think he would go that far. I think this is like would be very far-fetched to talk about LGBTQ. I think if we talk about real representation of women and minorities, like meaningful representation, that would be awesome. Like it's too early to, yeah. So that's how I think about him. It's again unknown, uncharted territories for us. Plus, I mean, Edgar, let's be honest about it. Syrians, we don't have political experience. We've never practiced politics in that sense. And now look at the scene itself right now. You have one group dominating the whole scene, not because that group killed its opponents, because there was no political life in the country.
Yeah.
So al-Julani came uncontested.
There was like parliamentary democracy in Syria 100 years ago. That was a long time ago. And it's like this is still we're talking the time when like the French like they would like bomb the parliament or something. I mean, it's a completely different world. So of course there's no democratic experience, which brings me on to my next point. And we've been speaking for a long time now. I'm going to let you go after this, but I want to know your take on like because we've been speaking about different like the jihadi community of Syria and the different jihadi groups. And when people talk about Syria, there's like this kind of idea that well, there's the Sunni Muslim majority, and then there are minorities, and it's as if like all Sunni Muslims think the same way. And obviously, you mentioned your secular friends. I'm sure some of them are Sunni, and so obviously, I'm sure that there are a lot of Sunni Muslims who don't want to live under jihadist rule, even though not necessarily a minority or a sect. Obviously, we just said there hasn't been democracy in Syria for a long time, so there's no opinion polls, so you don't know really what people think. But what's your take on like what do most people in Syria want? I mean, I think maybe for Westerners and for people who, like myself, who grew up in the Middle East, but maybe in very privileged communities in the major cities like Cairo and Beirut, and I've been to Damascus, and like the Middle East or like the Arab world that I know, I'm aware that it's a small bubble of people, having drinks in downtown Cairo and Beirut, and there's like a queer community, and but is that the same thing, the same case in Syria? Is that like a small bubble, or do you think that like this kind of like, let's say he establishes a kind of like pragmatic but still very Sunni Muslim coded Islamic republic, some kind of thing like this? Do you think that would be like what most people would want?
It's so difficult to quantify, right? Like again, I know like myself and other people who would like to have like a country where you can have freedom of speech, freedom of dress, freedom of like you want to have your freedom, right? And I think many people in Syria revolted against Assad for this reason, but also for other reasons, right? But if you think about it, Edgar, like the last, say, 5 years, I don't know, 6 years maybe. I think 2016 was like a breaking point in the Syrian uprising because the regime took Aleppo, and Aleppo was like, the biggest win, symbolic win for the regime. And I think there was this sense of disappointment, extreme disappointment within the opposition that the uprising is over. There's no revolution anymore. So those who stayed in the country and militarized themselves and got into the military scene, the majority of them went through this religious transformation, if you will, like to a degree where like they felt like it's only God that has helped them to survive because the international community had abandoned them at the time. That's the feeling.
Yeah.
And then these groups managed to put them into one big framework and saying like, we are doing jihad, but not jihad in the sense that we're going to go all over the world. We're doing jihad against Assad's regime. So those people who came now and liberated Syria, right? I think they think, or there is this sense among Damascene people, Aleppian people, like everyone is thinking, they did it, and it's time to try for them. Like they liberated the country with these religious views. So Assad for them, crack down on the Sunni community. They see it as a Sunni community. I mean, like some other Westerns, like they see the Sunni community homogeneous. And they want to try something more conservative, I think. And of course, many secular atheist Syrians. And by the way, even some religious figures, like I've talked to religious people, like observant Muslims who pray, who fast. For them, some of them was like, this is too much. We don't want to see this. Like, uh, we're not used to see people with beard ruling. We're not seeing to see people with beard fighting.
Yeah.
And also this has to do with how the regime depicted the opposition. He was like, they are terrorists, they are al-Qaeda, they are coming to kill you, right? So I think now secular people are trying to intervene as soon as possible to say to al-Julani, this is not okay. So for example, the flag thing we talked about, like immediately we're like, this is not okay. This is Syrian for all Syrians. But then Edgar, you have like here a little bit of disconnect between the political discourse of the leadership and the fighters. The political discourse of leadership is pretty much like, we want inclusivity, we want plurality, and it's true. I don't think he doesn't mean it, because if he wants to sit on power, he needs to do this, and he wouldn't. I don't think he would go to power and start killing minorities. I don't think so. But the fighters themselves, many of them, they still don't buy this. They think this is a more of like a media discourse, and they think that, some of them, at least some of them, think that they will take revenge. How? I think it will be very much institutionalized in a sense that minorities will not have the privilege they used to have. So previously you had the security apparatus, majority of them Alawites and Druze. Now they will be Sunnis, right?
Yeah.
And this will reflect on all society, Edgar, right? It reflects on everything. And I think they will try their chances now. al-Julani is the hero now in Syria. By the way, many loves him, but many supported him because they are afraid of him. We don't believe that democracy exists in Syria still. Like my dad, I was talking to him literally 2 days ago, like after a couple of days after Assad's fall. And then I was talking about something, and then when he reached Assad, he said, that guy. And I was like, what are you afraid of? And he was like, no, I just forgot. I can't still make sense that he fell.
Yeah.
So, okay, Assad went. Now we have al-Julani, and we're not sure how to deal with him. Is he really genuine? He wants to create this democratic state, democratic, at least, entity trying to. I'm very skeptical, Edgar, like for various reasons, but I'm very skeptical about this. And I think it might be tough for like secular people who wants to see like some sort of really like liberal democracy in Syria. I think it's too early to talk about this.
Yeah. Well, okay, on that cheerful note, um, Orwa Ajjoub, thank you so much for speaking to us today on Kalam Podcast. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elgar, so much. And thank you for pronouncing my name properly. The first host present me with my real name. It's like Orwa, so you're the first guy. So thank you for that.
Well, no, you're most welcome. There's certain perks to speaking Arabic.
Okay, thank you for having me.
That was Orwa Ajjoub and the 37th episode of Kalam Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. You may have noticed by now that our Syria series has kicked off for obvious reasons. This does not, however, mean that we've abandoned our Palestine series. These series will continue in parallel for some time. I'm your host, Edgar Mannheimer, and that's all from us this week. Peace.